Hi everybody, it's Lucinda Curran here, Principal Building Biologist at EcoHealth Solutions, and today I get to speak with the amazing Lyn McLean from EMR Australia. Now Lyn's been involved in the industry for over 20 years and has contributed so much to our knowledge and understanding through her work and also by way of her books, which we're here to talk about, the newest one, Wireless Wise Kids Today. Hi Lyn, how are you?
Hello, Lucinda. I'm fine. Thank you for talking to me this morning, and it's a pleasure to talk to you.
It's always fun catching up with you. Now, one of the first things I wanted to point out, now this is your first book, The Force.
That's right.
And this is like really, I guess, quite heavy and dense with a lot of information for people, whereas this one's incredibly different. It's written, I mean, yes, there's all the references and the information that people need to know, but it's written quite differently. Could you talk a little bit about why that is and what the differences are to help people understand?
Yeah, certainly. Look, what I find is that today people are so busy with all the different demands on them in life that they don't have a lot of time for reading. So I tried to make this book something that would be quick and easy to read. You can pick it up, you can turn to the section that you want, you can read the things that you need to know about very quickly and easily. And there are some tips, just dot point tips, the things that you can do to reduce exposure. So this is designed for the average person who knows nothing about this issue and wants to make their family safer. You don't need to be a technical expert, and you don't need to do lots and lots of reading to get the information.
I think you've just done it so beautifully because, I mean, this is an amazing resource, but it's definitely more of a textbook. And this is just like, a handy thing, keep in your pocket or your bag or carry it around and just pull it out and check things all the time. I don't know if you can see properly on the camera, but I've just bookmarked top and bottom. Like, I've bookmarked this to death, and I know a lot about this area. So, I mean, for me, this is an incredible resource for people. And I do love, I might even see if I can show people, there's this section here, where we've got the tips, like the wisest tips, and then we wise and to least wise. So it makes it really easy for people to follow and understand the best things that they can do to make a difference. So awesome work.
Oh, thank you. It's also, you mentioned that it has references. Everything that I've said has been referenced. The references aren't actually in the book, and the reason for that is the publisher thought that it might make it a little bit heavy, a bit like a textbook. So we have those online. They're on the publisher's website and they're on my website, so people can go to that, download the file really easily, and you'll be able to go to every reference that I've used for this and find the information that I've used and validate what I'm saying. So I've not made this up, and the references will validate that.
I think that's a fantastic way to go because, as I said, this size is kind of so handy to carry around. But then, you know, if you do want to check things or you're speaking to someone who's quite skeptical, it's like, well, actually, hey, here's the research paper or here's the source of that, and it's important.
Yeah, that's right. Putting all the references in makes the book bulkier. So it makes it simpler and easier for people to use, I think.
Totally. Now, in the book too, there's a list of what you call consumer-friendly words and phrases. Can you go through them with us and tell us what they actually really mean? It was such a source of amusement for me because it's so true. It was one of my favourite pages in the book.
Oh, I'm glad that you found that entertaining. I think it's really important that we remember that when we're buying products that are emitting wireless radiation, what they're actually emitting is radio frequency electromagnetic fields or radio frequency radiation. But what we find is that the marketers, the telecommunications companies and the people who are marketing various products that emit this radiation are not calling it that, and they don't want to call it that because who's going to buy a product that says it's emitting radiation? So they've coined a whole lot of words that they use instead. For example, energy. So even the Australian authorities will refer to this as electromagnetic energy. They won't say the word radiation. Similarly, people will hear you've got good reception. This device will have great reception, or this phone tower will give you great reception. What that really means is radiation. We'll be getting more radiation in that spot.
Yeah.
Similarly, wireless technology just means technology that's emitting radiation. And I always think if we went into a cafe and it said free radiation in this cafe, would we think, oh, fantastic, let's go in?
I have to show that diagram. That just made me chuckle. So just so people can see that. Like, if that was everywhere, like, you so wouldn't go there, would you?
Exactly, that's right. So I think the fact that we call these things by different names makes us feel that they're safer, but they're not necessarily. Another one that people often think, oh gosh, this has got no radiation, it's only using Bluetooth. So I want to say to you, if something says it's using Bluetooth, yes, it is putting out radiation. So be wary of devices that emit that. Another thing is coverage. If carriers are putting out a mobile phone tower, they'll say this is going to improve coverage and you'll have access to all these networks. What that really means is this is putting out more radiation and you'll be able to connect to it with your radiating devices. So I guess the caution is for people when they hear these words not to think, oh, this is a really good thing necessarily, but to understand that these are just misleading words that are being used for radiation. And there are a couple more. Smart meters. A lot of people, especially in Victoria, these days have got smart meters on their homes, smart electricity meters. What that really means is radiating electricity meters. So meters that communicate with radio frequency radiation. So all of these things are nice euphemisms that are used instead of saying the real word, which is radiation.
It's incredible, isn't it? And I think what's frustrating as well is there's so many different words, which is what you've highlighted. They're not using the same word, which is synonymous. They're using a whole lot of marketing stuff to just convince people that it's fine and a dandy and, go for it. It's good stuff. But
that's right. And it keeps changing all the time because as soon as people think, oh, smart meters, they're a bad thing, then companies come up with other names that they can use for them. And for example, in New South Wales, I've heard them referred to as remote monitoring meters instead of the word smart, because a lot of people are worried about smart meters.
Yeah.
It means the same thing. If it's doing something remotely, it's doing it, generally speaking, using radiation to carry the information. So just when you're reading information that comes from these sorts of sources, just be very wary and look at what these words might really mean.
Thank you. Now, we're also just talking, just so people understand, about things on the electromagnetic spectrum. So I think I'm going to do this the right way around. For me, it's the opposite way around. So we're going from the extremely low frequency all the way up to things that, are absolutely no question about as carcinogenic, deadly, problematic. Where does radio frequency sit in the field of, like, in that continuum? Where would that be roughly?
Okay, I guess it sits in the middle. So it's not low frequency in the terms of electric fields from and magnetic fields from power lines and things like that, but it's not as high as nuclear radiation. It sits in the middle. And in terms of danger, this is where the debate lies, because a lot of people will say, oh, it's not nuclear radiation, it's not ionizing radiation, so it's got to be okay. Well, gosh, that's a guess, and it's an assumption. Just because it's not ionizing doesn't make it safe. In fact, what we know is that there are thousands of studies now that are showing harmful effects from this radiation. So in my book, that puts a very big question mark next to this.
Definitely. And as a building biologist too, I think our whole approach is precautionary. If there's any question that it may not be safe, we just avoid or minimize. It's obvious, it's just a really basic way of living. You just be careful, be cautious. And I think as much as there's a lot of scientific debate at top level, we've got people ground level, suffering severely from all of this technology. And that's really not spoken about or acknowledged in this debate by those who are, purporting that it's completely safe and viable for everybody.
That's right. I don't think anyone can say it's safe. It's hard to prove something's safe, but how can you possibly say it's safe when there are, as I said, thousands of studies showing harmful effects? And now we have a lot of major bodies around the world starting to say, oh gosh, let's take precautions, let's make sure our kids aren't exposed, let's put a precautionary policy in place, let's label mobile phones and let people know that they emit radiation that could potentially be harmful. So I think we've got to the stage now where there's so much question about its safety that we should be listening to these authorities. And unfortunately, Australia seems to be lagging behind the rest of the world in that respect, because we're not seeing those sorts of precautions being put in place here. And I think that's unfortunate, because why is it that our children aren't getting the same level of protection as, say, children in other countries.
And it's interesting too, the other countries that have got better exposure standards and better precautionary protective measures in place, places like India, some of the Russian countries, it's incredible the difference in that level of protection, signage, precautions, keeping it out of schools, childcare centres, all of that, as well as I know in India they need to put signs up if it's going to be affecting one of the rooftop gardens. Things like that we've got phone towers popping up everywhere and nobody minds.
That's right. But there doesn't seem to be any precaution in place here, and I think that's really unfortunate. Hopefully, as people become more informed, that will change. And I guess the message that I want to get across to people is, okay, our authorities aren't putting precautions in place to look after us, so where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us at the point where we need to put precautions in place for ourselves and our families. And that's what this book is all about, because people don't realise there's a great deal that you can do to protect yourself and protect your children in your own home, irrespective of what's going out there in the wider world. And people will often say to me, I've got to move to the country because I've got to get away from this radiation. And I'll say, well, actually, you don't. You can manage to live quite safely in the city without necessarily being exposed to this radiation. And a lot of that comes back to your choices.
Yes.
And by the way, I should say, it doesn't mean that the country's necessarily lower in exposure either, but that's different.
Yeah, it is, but it's a point worth making, because I think a lot of times when people are suffering in the city, they go, I'll move to the country, but in a lot of cases there's many more problems there. Exactly. One of the things I totally loved about this, apart from being so readable, was it was so practical. It's so empowering. Straight away you can go, well, okay, look, I'm not ready to give up X, Y, and Z yet, but I'm willing to do this. And then, I can come back and I can do the next levels and work my way up and actually make the wisest choices. And that's brilliant. It's so well done.
Oh, thank you. Yes, well, I think it gives people choices. So you read this and you can see what your choices are. And that puts you in a very powerful position, because my view is making sensible choices is all about information. So here's the information. And, I hope people will find it useful.
I'm sure they will, absolutely. Now, I wanted to bring up the fact that a lot of people call this EMF stuff rubbish, but there's all sorts of evidence to the contrary, including something you speak about in your book. In Australia, there was a case in 2013 that recognised the problems. Could you explain a little bit about that for us?
Yes, certainly. Now, this is a really interesting case, because it's one of the few legal cases in the world, and it's an Australian legal case. And it was about a Dr. David McDonald, who was a principal scientist of the CSIRO, a government scientific body. And he was electrosensitive, which means that he reacted quite badly, developed symptoms when he was exposed to this sort of radiation, whether it was radiation from things like mobile phones or wireless devices, or even fields from electrical equipment. And he told his employers, the CSIRO, that he had this sensitivity when he started working there, and they were very good about accommodating him and allowing other people to do the work on technology that needed doing. And that worked quite nicely for a while. But then the CSIRO required him to undertake a number of trials where he was being exposed to this equipment. And when David was exposed to this radiation, he became almost instantly sick, and he had tremendous nausea and tremendous migraine headaches. So it became quite clear that he couldn't work with his technology, and he had to take a lot of time off work. He was too ill to be able to work. So he went through 7 years of legal action to get to the point where he had a case with the Australian Administrative Appeals Tribunal, ACAT, and they found in his favour, and they ordered the Commonwealth Government to pay compensation to him for the injuries that he experienced at work. And so this is a really significant development, because what it does is here we have a court that is basically recognising the condition of electromagnetic hypersensitivity, and also it's compensating someone for exposure at work. So if we think about that, how many workplaces require employees to be exposed to this radiation these days? So yesterday I was in a bank, and there's a cordless phone in the bank. which means that all staff are obliged to use that, which means that they're being exposed to radio frequency radiation. So we can start to ask, is there legal liability that these banks, these other organisations, these companies have when they're giving their employees wireless radiation emitting devices? And I think that down the track we're going to see quite some interesting litigation on this. So that's a long
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, I've felt for a while that we're sort of reaching the crest where there's going to start being a whole lot of class action where people are suffering so immensely and intensely. And, you know, not to take away from cancer, cancer is certainly a problem, but there's all these other health effects before cancer that really mean there's very little quality of life for some people, particularly those who are incredibly sensitive.
Yeah.
It just feels that there's that swell happening, you know, it's still building. I get tingly every time I talk about it, but I feel that we're just on this crest, and then there's going to be so much legal action because people haven't been protected. And I hope that happens soon, and then, you know, we can actually change things. That'd be great.
Look, honestly, it's a matter of time because, you know, you asked, is this real? And a lot of people say it's not. Well, I'd just like to come back to that because there's no doubt that this radiation is real. You can take a meter, you can put it in front of a device, you can measure, you can do different things with the device and see that the meter records that fluctuation. So it is a fact. Fused radiation is a fact. The fact that these devices emit it is a fact. It can't be doubted. The only thing that people can doubt is the effect on the body. So we know, as I said, that there are thousands of studies showing harmful effects on the body, on people, on animals, on plants even. I guess it's still at the stage where there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of debate, it's a fairly new issue. But I'd just like to say, I read an article the other day about an Australian scientist who's come up with a test now that tests and proves that people have chronic fatigue syndrome. So I don't know if your listeners will have heard of this, but a few years back, chronic fatigue syndrome is one of those things that people said, oh, it's not real, making it up, they're malingerers, they're just trying to get out of working.
Or it's attention seeking and all of that. Yeah.
Exactly. So now we know that not only is it actually something, but that you can test for it and prove it. I really feel that we'll do that very soon with this condition. We'll be able to say, oh, you know, gosh, it is real, and here's the test that demonstrate it. And certainly there are scientists in other parts of the world who are testing people, measuring their reactions, you know, exposing them to certain frequencies and able to monitor their reactions to that. So yes, there's a lot of evidence.
And can I just build on that a little bit, because I know that a lot of people who do see this as rubbish, they kind of go, oh, but I don't get a headache from it or whatever. But there's stuff that you may not even be aware of. So there's things, I know Professor Martin Paul in America was looking at the voltage-gated, I can't say it straight today, voltage-gated calcium channels in cells and how they're affected by exposure to this type of radiation. Then you've got Magda Havas in Canada. She's in Canada, isn't she?
Yes.
And she's looking at the way that blood reacts and how all the blood cells actually stack up rather than, you know, freely float around. So I think even whether we've got conscious physical reactions or not, our bodies are dealing with this stuff or trying to deal with it. And that's what I'd really like people to understand. You know, it's happening at a cellular level.
Exactly. And what's interesting, people have contacted me and said, you know, I used this technology, I was perfectly fine. I used it 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Suddenly, they're developing reactions. So what seems to be the case, and what researchers like Henry Lai are saying, Dr. Henry Lai, that it's the cumulative effect of this radiation that's the problem. It's not that if you use it for 5 minutes, you're necessarily going to react. And so a lot of the people who are suffering are people who've used it for long periods of time or used it intensely for short periods of time. So the fact that someone doesn't experience reactions right now doesn't mean, oh, fine, no problems in the future. And that's the concern as far as our kids go, because what happens if our kids who are exposed to this now from before birth and exposed to these devices a lot when they're quite young, what happens to them when they start to build up this cumulative exposure, and by the age of 5, 10, 15, they've been exposed for all that time? And we don't know the answer to that, but it's frightening really to consider the possibilities.
Yeah, it's really, really scary because really it's like a worldwide experiment. Let's just wait and see what happens. You know, in 50 years we might legislate on this, but for now, let's just see. Let's watch. And where's the ethics there?
Well, what parent would say if a company approached them and said, look, we've got this new chemical, we've got this new drug, we want your child to try it, and we don't know how it'll affect them, and we don't know how it'll affect them long term, but, you know, if it's effective, it could make us a lot of money. Would you allow your child to take this? Mm-hmm. What parent would say yes? And yet, parents are putting their children in front of iPads when they're a few months old. They're buying them iPad potties. They're letting them play with their mobile phones. So I have to tell you a story. Is that okay?
Go for it.
Time for a story? So I was talking to a man a few weeks ago, and he's had a child who was so tiny. The child looked as if he was about 2 or 3. And the man was interested in my book, and I was saying, oh, yes, look, it's a good idea to take precautions, and here are some of the reasons. And he said to me, don't think I can do that. My child will kick up a fuss if I didn't let him play with my mobile phone. And I'm thinking, this child is 2. And this child is dictating what parent does.
Haven't we seen that before? Just so people know, Lyn and I both used to be teachers, so we've seen a lot of this kind of stuff.
So, yeah, there are all sorts of worrying considerations around that, I think.
It's crazy. I know one of the times I really freaked out was I was sitting waiting to go in to see my physio, and the person who was before me came out pushing the pram. Now, there was the baby in it, but there was also a stroller part. And the child in the stroller was playing on an iPad, and she dumped her bag in the pram with the baby, which, of course, she just chucked the phone in and all of that as well. It's like, what is this tiny little baby being exposed to? Like, it's scary. It's really scary.
Oh, look, it is. And we see women who are pregnant sitting in waiting rooms with their mobile phone, sitting on their fetus and playing on their phone. We see mothers breastfeeding their children, and in fact, your listeners might have heard of brexting, which is where somebody's breastfeeding a child while they're texting. So the child's in their arms. You have to try and picture this. The mobile phone's right next to the child's head, and the child's being exposed all the time.
I didn't know there was a phrase for that. I mean, it's the crazy stuff that happens. I mean, even you know, sitting and doing stuff on your laptop, Googling on your tummy at night while you're pregnant.
Exactly. Yeah. We had one lady too who was having problems with fertility. And every night she would get into bed, and she and her husband would get into bed, and they would sit there for quite long periods of time, both with their laptops on their laps. So again, picture that. The radiation is going straight into the man's testicles. The radiation is going straight into the woman's uterus, ovaries, and they're wondering why they can't get pregnant. Now, I don't know the end of that story. I don't know whether they changed the situation and they became pregnant. But yeah, I think it's just important for people to realise the implications of what they're actually doing for themselves.
Yeah. And actually, do you want to just explain a little bit more? Because I know what you're talking about here, but laptops are called laptops, but they're not meant to go on your laps. Do you want to just talk everyone through that?
Yeah, well, most laptops these days emit radiation. So if you have it sitting on your lap, that radiation is going straight through the laptop and straight into your body, and it's going to the closest part of the body to the laptop, which for a man is going to be his reproductive organs. Actually, for a woman, it's going to probably be her reproductive organs too. So even though they're called laptops, they should never, ever be placed on the body. And the same thing goes for an iPad. And if you really have to use these devices, then put them on a table where you've got a separation between your body and the radiation.
Yeah, thank you. It's so important for people to know that, because I think, you know, I guess because we talk about it all the time, we forget to explain, but that's awesome. Thank you. Now, as I'm always learning about EMF, there's so much to learn. It's like the more you know, the more you think got to find out because it's just
Exactly.
tip of the iceberg all the time. But one
Yeah.
of the biggest shocks for me was realising the insurance side of EMF. And I know you talk about it in your book. Would you like to explain that for people?
Yes, well, I think a lot of people will assume that if they're exposed to radiation or they expose other people to radiation, that's all fine, their insurance will cover it. Well, that's not necessarily the case. And what we're seeing is that some of the big insurance companies like Swiss Re, for example, have recognised this radiation as a potential risk for the future. And as a result of that, some insurance companies have excluded cover for any problems that are associated with electromagnetic radiation. So if you've got an insurance policy, and I think this is important for any company, anybody who's employing people, any employer who's exposing their employees to radiation, check your insurance cover and see, is there an exclusion for that? And I spent a lot of time early last year ringing up insurance companies and saying, have you got exclusions? Do you cover it? And a lot of the companies weren't quite sure, and some of them didn't, but some of them definitely did. And one thing that I find interesting is that Telstra, in its annual reports, used to report on its insurance situation, and it was able to obtain insurance from external sources. But after about 2004, that started disappearing, and you'll find that in its later annual reports it talks about the fact that it is self-insuring. So that sounds to me very much like no companies were prepared to take on the risk of compensating people for damage that might be caused by Telstra exposing them.
Yeah.
So that's a guess, but I think it's a pretty fair one.
Yeah, well, I think too, considering that there's the question mark, and even at that level there's a question mark, and insurance companies certainly don't want to do big payouts. So, it makes sense that they'd pull back. But if people can understand that even that level, they're worried. It's
Well, that's
why
right.
should we take the risk?
That's right. And I think it's also interesting if somebody has got a mobile phone tower on their property, if they're renting it out to a carrier, then if I were in that situation, I'd be asking, what's the insurance situation? Is the carrier going to indemnify me? Does my insurance indemnify me if there are risks in the future? So, getting income from renting out your property might not necessarily be a good thing in the long term if you have to pay insurance to people who are suffering as a result of your actions.
Yeah. So I was just going to jump to a story. Is it okay if I just...
Of course.
All right. Yeah. I just remember reading some research about an experiment they did with ants. So, they had the big tank of ants. They put a mobile phone, like I said, ant colony. They put a mobile phone just in standby mode, no calls underneath it. And apparently the ants were really agitated. So they were like standing on their hind legs and spinning around, freaking out, going, what is happening? And really quickly, they grabbed all their babies and ran and took them to the furthest away they could from the mobile phone. And I would just think, gee, ants act like that. And we're still kind of going, oh, you know what? It's probably safe. We're not even thinking about precaution. We're just going, don't worry about it. I guess it's a little bit of the Aussie thing, but it's happening worldwide. She'll be right. But I think that the end part of the story, which I think is amusing, is what they used that area over the mobile phone for was their toilet. So I think that's the best part of the story. But, it's like, guys, why aren't we talking about it? Why aren't we acting on it? Why aren't we just going, hang on, it doesn't even feel right. For people who can feel it, it doesn't feel good. Keep away.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? Because there are similar studies that have been done on bee populations and bee hives, and when mobile phone radiation is put near a beehive, again, the bees will abandon that hive. So what do they know that we don't know? For me, one of the really big concerns is that as consumers, we're not asking questions about this. And we're saying, oh yeah, the marketers are telling us this. Oh, this technology is great. Look at the colour, look at the design. I will look so cool with this. I will have the latest model, a later model than all my friends have. And so those sorts of considerations are driving our behaviour as consumers, not safety. And I think that it's time that consumers start to see that maybe the people who are selling devices don't always have consumer safety as their number one priority. I think maybe it could be profit. So please, consumers, take notice, ask questions, think before you buy.
Totally, because I think that's the thing as consumers, it's almost like a naive thing, but we should have this right that if it's on the shelves available to us, it should be, tested or, checked or, assured that it's safe for us to buy. I mean, you would assume that, and it's fair to. And I think if people can understand that often those things haven't happened, or the the exposure standards aren't there, way too high or whatever, we need to take the power back and look after ourselves and really question.
That's true. And I believe that as consumers, we have enormous power, because it's what we buy and it's what we ask for that manufacturers are ultimately going to respond to. And we see that all the time in society. So that gluten-free wasn't a thing back in the days when I was young, but now there are all sorts of gluten-free products on the market simply because consumers have demanded them. There are restaurants providing gluten-free options for meals. So what you do, what you ask for, really makes a difference.
That's fabulous. It's so empowering, isn't it? Like, we've got so much power and so much control over our lives, and we really just need to realise that and embrace it.
Yeah, and I think it's really unfortunate if we give that power away to the companies who are wanting to make profit from our exposure.
Totally. Now, I've got one more question for you about this brilliant book. And I'm just going to repeat the title because I think it's so good. It's Wireless Wise Families. So it's full of wise and wisest actions. And can you share some of the ones with regards to public transport in particular? Because I think that's just a fascinating area to explore, because I think many people don't even consider it.
Yes. Well, if you hop onto a train and somebody's sitting next to you, you'll probably notice that there's not very much difference, not very much space between the two of you. So if you're on your mobile phone, guess what you're doing to the person next to you? Of course, you're exposing them. If you have your mobile phone in your pocket that is just a couple of centimetres away from somebody's hips, you are exposing that person. Of course, you're exposing yourself as well. But I think it's really important for people who have or are using this technology to think about what they are doing to other people near them. Now, that might sound like, oh my goodness, that's really an exaggeration. That can't possibly be a problem, can it? But yes, it can, for a number of reasons. Firstly, when you're in public transport, you're in a metal shell, and that metal shell is reflecting the signal and it's amplifying the signal. The same applies in cars and lifts as well. So you can be exposed to more radiation in those sorts of places than you would be if you're out in the open air, and that signal could escape. But the second thing is, you don't know who's sitting next to you or what their health condition might be, or whether they have cancer, for example. Now, cancer cells, for example, absorb more radiation than ordinary cells. So for someone with cancer to be exposed to this radiation is far more dangerous than for your average healthy person to be exposed to it. And also, there are people in society who are so badly affected by this radiation that they will become sick as a result of this exposure. So in our network, and keep in mind, I have thousands of people who are affected by this radiation in our network, and they will tell me stories like, well, we can't go on public transport anymore because of not their own mobile devices, but other people's wireless devices. So, we're talking mobile phones, we're talking tablets, we're talking laptops. All of those sorts of things are emitting radiation. And again, if we go back in history, not very far back in history, hop on a train, you see everybody's reading a book. But what are they doing now? They're all doing this. They're on their phones, they're texting, they're talking, they're downloading, they're watching TV, they're doing work, they're processing emails. So there are so many wireless devices in a bus or a train carriage that the amount of radiation is really so much higher than natural background levels.
Yeah. Actually, one other thing that I keep finding people have got no idea about, and often they're most resistant about changing this, is the smartwatches or the Fitbit Garmin kind of things as well. So, this is right on their body. And, apart from the devices that we're using, if you're wearing something like that as well, that could be a huge problem.
Yeah, we had a very interesting story, and the lady who told me the story allowed us to put it on our website. So if you go onto EMR Australia website and Google Fitbit, I think it's called, you'll find this story. But this woman had a Fitbit, it was a new Fitbit, and it was a wireless Fitbit, and she wore it. She developed all sorts of symptoms. She became so sick. She developed rash over her body. She went to doctors. She went to more doctors. She went to specialists. She went to more specialists. Nobody could find anything wrong with her. But she was so sick, she had to give up her job. So she wasn't working anymore. And she was still sick. She went to an acupuncturist. The acupuncturist said, "Get that thing off your hand." She did. She got better. Or her symptoms disappeared. Now, I'm not going to say that happened instantly, but she was then able to demonstrate that wearing that produced her symptoms. Taking it off was associated with no symptoms. And she just said to me, "Look, we've got to tell people, we've got to get this message out there, because people don't realise that when you strap these devices on, you are irradiating your body."
Exactly. And then, you can use them to measure your sleep, and guess what? You don't sleep so well. It's actually one of the things that always astounds me too, sort of just sidetracking slightly, but you know how there's the apps where it measures your sleep, and all of a sudden we've got an insomnia epidemic. And you and I both know, which is why we're both smiling, radio frequency severely impairs your sleep or has a negative impact on it. And yeah, of course we've got an insomnia epidemic when you've got these devices under your pillow or strapped on your wrist, and you're exposed 24/7.
That's right. And it can affect your body even if you're not wearing it at night time. So, for example, if you use your mobile phone during the day, that can still reduce your melatonin levels at night, which is associated with poor sleep and other things as well. So I think it's important for people to look at their overall health and look at some of the symptoms they might be experiencing, and then start to ask questions like, well, could it be to do with this exposure? Because you said before that people are saying, "Oh no, I'm okay, it's fine, it's not a problem." But how do they know unless they've examined that and unless they've actually tested, do they feel better when they're not exposed? And so many people tell me that when they go away from their homes, they go away from their smart meters, the mobile phone tower down the street, their neighbour's Wi-Fi, they go out to somewhere where it's peaceful and quiet and there's no wireless radiation, they feel so much better.
It's significant, isn't it? Like that difference, that experience is so, so different. And yeah, I mean, often I'll encourage people, just try it for a weekend or try it for a week and see if you notice any difference. And then, you call up a week later, it's like, "How are you feeling?" "Oh, nothing's really changed." It's like, "Oh, really? How's your sleep?" And I'll ask about all the symptoms. It's like, "Oh, it's all much better." Okay. So nothing's changed, but it's all much better. Maybe there's a link there for you.
That's right. That's right. I think what people have to ask questions too, because what we've done in the last, let's say, 20 years, conservatively, is to change the entire electromagnetic picture of our planet, but especially of our homes. So again, going back not so long ago, we didn't have Wi-Fi, we connected with wires. But suddenly wires are old-fashioned and we've got to have everything wireless. So if we've changed the whole electromagnetic picture of our homes, how can we say that's safe? We don't know, because this is such a new phenomenon. It has never occurred on the planet before. It has never been tested. It's only now that the research is being done once the technology is in the marketplace. So I don't know that we can assume that changing the entire electromagnetic picture of what's going on in our homes is actually safe. How do we know that exposing our unborn children, our babies, our young children, whom we know absorb more radiation than other people, exposing sick people, exposing cancer patients, how do we know that exposing them long term is going to be safe? And the sad thing is that we don't, and that the experiments are only being done on the effects of this radiation now, and it's going to be a long time. It's going to be a long time before we know the results of long-term exposure on humans.
Absolutely. It's a little bit like the DDT and tobacco and all of that, isn't it? You know, it's like everything takes a while to catch up with the reality of what people experience.
That's right. That's right. Well, I think we've seen this happen before in society. We saw it with tobacco, we saw it with lead, we saw it with asbestos, that there was scientific evidence. There were the naysayers, oh no, it's all safe, it's all safe, it's all safe, let's make a profit from these industries. And then years later, it was proven that these things were harmful. Personally, I have no doubt that that's the case with wireless radiation. Time will tell. I think the thing at the present moment is for families to decide, are they willing to be part of that experiment? Do they want their kids to be part of the statistics on this? Or do they want to say, no, let's wait till we know one way or the other, is it safe, is it not safe, before we start exposing everyone?
Brilliant advice. And I'm going to ask for a final tip. What would be just one tip to help people make wise choices and have a wireless wise family?
Oh, love wires. Love their wires. Yeah, so many things can be connected with wires instead of wirelessly without any disadvantage whatsoever. So cordless phones, for example, they emit lots and lots of radiation. They're one of the highest sources in the home generally. People often have no idea that that's the case. They've got no idea what's coming out of these things. They're emitting radiation 24/7. Plug in a corded phone without any cordless function and no radiation at all. Easy, so easy.
It is, isn't it? Thank you so much for not only writing all these amazing books, doing the incredible work you're doing, but also sharing your wisdom with everyone today. Thank you so much.
Lucinda, it's my great pleasure. I'm very, very passionate about this issue and very, very much wanting people and families to get the message and just to be able to make decisions. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to get this message out a little bit further today.
It's my pleasure. And just for everybody's, to make it easy for everybody, would you like to just let them know your website?
Yes, it's emraustralia.com.au. So I hope to see lots of you visiting us.
That would be fantastic. Well, thank you again, Lyn, and everybody else have a fantastic day.
You too. Thank you, Lucinda.
Bye-bye.